From Alice's Adventures in Wonderland by Lewis Carroll. This is Chapter 4. The Rabbit Sends in a Little Bill. It was the White Rabbit trotting slowly back again and looking anxiously about as it went, as if it had lost something, and she heard it muttering to itself, the Duchess, oh, my dear paws, oh, my furs and whiskers. She'll get me executed as sure as ferrets are ferrets. Where can I have dropped them, I wonder? Alice guessed in a moment that it was looking for the fan and pair of kid gloves, and she was naturally began hunting about for him, but they were nowhere to be seen. Everything seemed to have changed since her swim in the pool, and the great hall with the glass table and the little door had vanished completely. Very soon, the rabbit noticed Alice, so she went hunting about and called out to her in an angry tone, "Why, Marianne, what are you doing here? Run home at this moment and fetch me a pair of gloves and a fan. Quick now!" And Alice was so much frightened she ran off once in the direction it pointed to, without trying to explain the mistake it had made. "He took me for his housemaid," she said to herself as she ran. "How surprised he'll be when he finds out who I am, but I'd rather take him his fan and gloves. That is, if I can find them." And as she said this, she came upon a neat little house with the door of which was a bright brass plate that said W. Rabbit engraved on it. She went in without knocking and hurried upstairs in great fear lest she meet the real Marianne, and it turned out the house before she had found the fan and slippers. "How queer it seems," Alice said to herself, "to be going messages for a rabbit. I suppose Dinah will be on me for messages next." And she began fancying the sort of things that would happen. "Miss Alice, come here directly and get me ready for my walk. Coming in a minute, nurse. But I've to watch the mouse hole till Dinah comes back and see that the mouse doesn't get out. Oh, only I don't think," Alice went on, "that Dinah'd stop in the house if it began ordering people around like that." By this time she'd found her way into a tidy little room with a table and a window, and on it she'd hoped a fan and two or three pairs of tiny white kid gloves. She took up the fan and a pair of gloves, and it was just going to leave the room when her eye fell upon a little bottle that stood near the looking-glass. There was no label this time with the words "Drink me," but nevertheless she uncorked it and put it to her lips. "I know something interesting sure to happen," she said to herself, "whenever I eat or drink anything. So I'll just see what this bottle does. I do hope it makes me grow large again, for I'm quite tired of being such a tiny little thing." It did so indeed, and much sooner than she had expected. Before she had drunk half the bottle, she found her head pressing against the ceiling, and had to stoop to save her neck from being broken. She hastily put down the bottle, saying, "That's quite enough. I hope I shan't have grow any more. As it is, I can't get out the door. I do wish I hadn't drunk quite so much." Alas, it was too late to wish that. She went on growing and growing, and very soon had to kneel on the floor. And in another minute there was not even enough room for this, and she tried with effect to lie down, with one elbow against the door and the other arm curled around her head. Still she went on growing, and at last, as a last resort, she put one arm out the window and one foot up the chimney, and she said to herself, "Now I can do no more. Whatever happens, what will become of me?" Luckily for Alice, the little magic bottle had now taken its full effect, and she grew no larger. Still, it was very uncomfortable, and as there seemed to be no sort of chance of getting out of the room again, no wonder if she felt so unhappy. It was much pleasanter at home, thought poor Alice, when one wasn't growing larger and smaller and being ordered around by mice and rabbits. "I wish I hadn't gone down this rabbit hole, and yet, it's rather curious, this sort of life. I do wonder what can happen to me. When I used to read fairy tales, I fancied the kind of thing never happened, but now I am here, in the middle of one. There ought to be a book written about me, and there ought. And when I grow up, and I'll write one, but when I'm grown up now," she added in a sorrowful tone, "at least there's no room for me to grow up any more here. But then," thought Alice, "I shall never get older than I am now. That'll be a comfort in one way, never to be an old woman. But then always to have lessons to learn. Oh, I shouldn't like that." "Oh, you foolish Alice," she answered herself. "How can you learn lessons in here? There's hardly room for you, no room at all, any lesson books." And so she went on, taking first one side and then the other, and making quite the conversation of it all together. But after a minute she heard a voice outside, and stopped to listen. "Marianne, Marianne," said the voice, "fetch me my gloves this minute." Then came a little pattering of feet on the stairs, and Alice knew it was the rabbit coming to look for her, and she trembled till she shook the house, quite forgetting and she was now 1,000 times as large as the rabbit, and no reason to be afraid of it. Presently the rabbit came up to the door, excuse me, and tried to open it. But as the door opened inwards and Alice's elbow was pressed against it, that attempt proved a failure. Alice heard it say to itself, "Then I'll go round and get into the window." "That you won't," thought Alice, and after a while she fancied until she heard the rabbit just under the windows. She suddenly spread out her hand to make a snatch in the air. She did not get a hold of anything, but she heard a little shriek and a fall and a crash of broken glass, from which she concluded it was just possible it had fallen into the cucumber frame or something of that sort. Next came the angry voice, the rabbit's. "Pat, Pat, where are you?" And then a voice she'd never heard before. "Sure there, I'm here, digging for apples, your honor." "Digging for apples indeed," said the rabbit angrily. "Here, come, help me with this." Sounds of more broken glass. "Now tell me, Pat, what's in that window?" "Sure, it's an arm, your honor," he pronounced. "Arm." "An arm? You goose. Who ever saw that size? Why, it fills the whole window." "Sure it does, your honor. But it's an arm, all right, for that." Well, it's got no business here at any rate. Go and take it away." There was a long silence after this, and Alice could only hear whispers now and then, such as, "Sure, I don't like it, your honor. Not at all, not at all. Do as I tell you, you coward." And at last she spread her hand out again and made another snatch in the air. This time there were two little shrieks and sounds of more broken glass. What a number of cucumber frames there must be, thought Alice. I wonder what they'll do next. As for pulling me out of the window, I only wish they could, for I'm sure I don't want to stay in here any longer." She waited for some time without hearing anything more, and at last came a rumbling of little cartwheels and the sound of a good many voices all talking together. She made out the words, "Where's the other ladder?" "Why, I hadn't to bring one. Bill's got the other. Bill, fetch it here. Put 'em up on this corner. No, tie 'em first together. No, they don't reach half that yet. Oh, that'll be enough. Don't you particular... Here, Bill, catch hold of this rope. Will the roof bear? Mind that slate's loose. Oh, it's coming down. Heads below." And a loud crash. "Now who did that? It was Bill, I fancy. Who's to do? Who's to go down the chimney? Nah, I shan't. You do it. No, that won't do then. Bill, you go here, Bill. The master says you to go down the chimney." "Oh," says Bill. "Got to come down the chimney, has he?" said Alice to herself. "Why, they seem to have put everything upon Bill. I wouldn't want to be in Bill's place right now for a good deal. There's a fireplace is narrow to be sure, but I think I can give a little kick." She drew her foot as far down the chimney as she could and waited till she heard a little animal. She couldn't guess what sort it was, scratching and scrambling around in the chimney close above her. And then says to herself, "This is Bill," and she gave one sharp kick and waited to see what would happen next. The first thing she heard was a general chorus of, "Ah, there goes Bill," and then the rabbit's voice alone. "Catch him by the hedge." Then silence, and then another confusion of voices. "Hold his head up. Brandy now. Don't choke him. How is it, old fellow? What's happened to you? Tell us all about it." Last came a little feeble, squeaking voice. "That's Bill," thought Alice. "Well, I hardly know. No more think ye I'm better now, but I'm a deal flustered to tell you. All I know is something comes at me like a jack-in-a-box, and then ups I goes like a skyrocket." "So you did, old fellow," said the others. "We must burn the house down," said the rabbit's voice, and Alice called out as loud as she could, "If you do, I'll set Dinah on you." And there was dead silence instantly, and Alice thought to herself, "I wonder if that what they'll do next. If they had any sense, they would take the roof off." After a moment or two, she began moving around again, and Alice heard the rabbit say, "A barrowful will do, to begin with." A barrowful of what? thought Alice, but she could not no longer doubt that for the next moment a shower of little pebbles came rattling in at the window, and some of them hit her in the face. "I'll put a stop to this," she said to herself, and shouted, "You better not do that again," which she produced another dead silence. Alice noticed to her surprise that some of the pebbles were all turning into little cakes as they lay on the floor, and a bright idea came into her head. If I eat one of these cakes, she thought, I'm sure to change my size. I can't possibly go make me any larger. It must make me small, I suppose. So she swallowed one of the cakes and excuse me, and was delighted to find that she began shrinking directly. As soon as she was small enough to get through the door, she ran out of the house and found quite a crowd of little animals and birds waiting outside. The poor little lizard, Bill, was in the middle, being held up by two guinea pigs, who were giving it something out of a bottle. They all made a rush at Alice the moment she appeared, but she ran off as hard as she could, and soon found herself safe in a thicket of woods. The first thing I've got to do, said Alice to herself as she wandered about the wood, is grow to my right size again. And the second thing is to find my way into that lovely garden. I think that will be the best plan. It sounded an excellent plan, no doubt, and she very neatly and simply arranged. The only difficulty was she had not the slightest idea of how to set about it. While she was peering around anxiously among the trees, a sharp little bark just over her head made her look up in a great hurry. An enormous puppy was looking down at her with large round eyes and feebly scratching out one paw, trying to touch her. Poor little thing, said Alice in a coaxing tone, and she tried hard to whistle to it, but she was terribly frightened all the time that she thought it might be hungry, in which case it might very likely eat her up in spite of all of her coaxing. Hardly knowing what she did, she picked up a little bit of stick and held it out to the puppy, whereupon the puppy jumped into the air, all of its feet at once, with a yelp of delight, and rushed at the stick. She made believe to worry it then, and then Alice dodged behind a great thistle to keep herself from being run over. And at the moment she appeared on the other side, the puppy made another rush at the stick, tumbled head over heels in a hurry to get a hold of it. Then Alice was thinking it was very like having a play game with a cart horse and expecting every moment to be trampled under its feet. She ran around the thistle again, and then the puppy began a series of short charges at the stick, running very little way forward each time and a long way back, barking hoarsely all the while, till at last it sat down a good way off, panting, with its tongue hanging out of its mouth and its great eyes half shut. This seemed to Alice to be the opportunity to make an escape, so she set off at once and ran until she was quite tired and out of breath, until the puppy's bark sounded faint in the distance. And yet, what a dear little puppy it was, said Alice as she leaned against a buttercup to rest herself, and fanned herself with one of the leaves. I should have liked teaching it tricks very much, if only I'd been the right size to do it. Oh dear, I'd nearly forgotten that I've got to grow up again. Let me see, how's that to be managed? I suppose I ought to eat or drink something or other, but the great question is what? The great question certainly is what? Alice looked all around her, the flowers and blades of grass, and she could not see anything that looked like the right thing to eat or drink under the circumstances. There was a large mushroom near her, about the same height as herself, and when she looked about it, under it, and both sides behind it, it occurred to her she might look to see what was on top of it. She stretched herself up on tiptoe and peeped over the edge of the mushroom, and her eyes immediately met those of a large blue caterpillar that was sitting on the top with its arms folded, quietly smoking a long hookah and not taking the smallest notice of anything else.